Hello, my name is Agata Kołodziejczyk. I work for Vales Marineris and Analog Astronaut Training Center. Today I'm going to introduce you to space medicine, space biology and analog research. In this lecture, we will touch 5 main topics. First, what is space medicine? Then I will speak about astronaut selection, space medicine on International Space Station. I will give you an introduction to space biology and analog research in lunar and Martian simulations. I hope you will enjoy. So let's start. What is space medicine? Well, it derives from aviation medicine and it is about astronaut selection, keeping astronauts healthy, working in a safe environment, and here we are speaking about astronauts' healthcare system. One more comment, digression, that if I say astronaut, of course I mean all people who are in space, including cosmonauts and taikonauts. So please forgive me for this generalization. Space medicine also is responsible for development of new medical methods, procedures, equipment and drugs. And finally, in space medicine, you need to estimate risks. So all people who love algorithms, probabilities, artificial intelligence are very welcome to take part of this research and, of course, applications. Here I give you an example of European Astronaut Center team. This is like a space medicine team, and you can see that it consists on many people and different groups of experts. First, of course, there are medical doctors who are responsible for astronaut selection, medical examinations of them, of course. And then we have a group of physical training experts and physiotherapists, and they are responsible for training before and during the mission, for rehabilitation after the mission. And finally, we had a group of biomedical engineers who are responsible for health monitoring during the mission, for telecommunication between space station astronauts and Mission Control Center, yes. And then we have also crew healthcare system, which are responsibilities for biomedical engineers. They are also designing medical equipment, they are organizing proper trainings, proper specifications to these instruments. When it comes to astronaut selection, we can divide 5 levels of this process, and it takes about 9 to 11 months. First, I show you these levels. This is, of course, for European Space Agency for 2009 astronaut selection. This is an example, and in bars you can see a number of people who were applying, and then a number of people who passed to another level. First, we start with online application where people send their CVs, their motivation letters, and a selection committee is selecting the best ones. These people are invited to come and to perform cognitive test. This is quite of difficult thing, and many people consider this as the most difficult part of the selection process. Well, what you can see here, what you can get here, European Space Agency and Team Peak, they published a book revealing examples of exercises, of tasks that are used for this cognitive test. And basically it is requiring high school knowledge from physics, from mathematics, logical thinking. Then you have some tests from spatial awareness, learning, memory. You have also some reflex exercises, and they are very interesting, but you need to be very focused and very precise. So they really want to see how you think and how fast you think. After you pass this very difficult, hard test, then you go to much easier psychological test. For one people, it is not easier because they don't know what is the correct answer. And it is not that there are correct answers, Each mission is different, and of course it is kind of like a casting. So psychologists, they try to fit the best personality, the best character to the mission, to the mission structure, the mission scenario. So you cannot really learn by heart the correct answers for this test. But it is quite easy, and you simply have to be honest. Then you have medical tests, which are not really depending on you, on your skills, on your hardworking personality. It is just your health and your body. And the final thing is interview. After this interview, the committee selects 10 qualified people, and then the final 7 people became, hopefully, astronauts. The level 4 that I mentioned, medical tests, are very interesting also for us because they show that nearly 51% of people that reach already this 4th level, they have no idea about their problems with circulatory system. And it also is for us a good message that we should be concerned about our circulatory system. It is very hard, to feel it. You have to run and then you have to observe your body. Usually people do not do this. A second thing, 25% of rejected people were because of vision problems. And this you can check on internet using several tests for vision. And then only few persons were related with other types of physiological problems. So, astronaut selection is to reduce the health risk on board of the space station. And for this, you don't need only to be lucky and to perform properly the selection process, but also you need to make regular medical checkups. Astronauts are examined before the mission, like 10 days before the mission. They have to go to quarantine, and normally it's about 1 week before the mission. In pandemic times like now, it's about 3 to 4 weeks. And of course, it depends on pandemic type of this pandemic factor and nature. And depending on this, medical doctors and scientists, they regulate procedures for quarantine. Of course, after quarantine and before, you need to perform several trainings, emergency simulations, also crew medical officer trainings. Then you need to be familiarized with medical equipment on board the space station. You have to perform regular medical and psychological teleconferences during the mission. You have to be fit in order to get back to the Earth. So every day, 2 hours, you need to undergo physical activity, and you have to monitor your physiological parameters. And finally, what may be surprising for some of you is that you need to take regular teleconferences with your relatives, with your family, friends. This is to keep your mood in a proper shape. Well, let's move to the International Space Station. Probably all of you know these basic parameters. This is the largest international project, and International Space Station is orbiting 400 kilometers above our heads with quite fast velocity, 7.6 kilometers per second. And this gives 90 minutes cycles, what means that our natural cycles, which are 24 hours, are disturbed. So biological clock on the International Space Station in our astronauts is disturbed. Other environmental parameters like atmosphere, temperature, pressure, everything is quite similar. What I didn't write here on this slide is that on ISS it's quite noisy, but actually astronauts like this noise. Then they feel safe because it means that air conditioning is working and ventilation is working. Of course, during the mission in space, we have several changes in our health because of hazardous environment. And the first thing is microgravity. Then we have, of course, artificial environment, artificial light, cosmic radiation, and all these physical factors, environmental factors, they induce health changes. And we can distinguish short and long-term effects. Short-term changes can be physical or psychological. Physical ones are induced by microgravity, noise, artificial light, and cosmic radiation, and they generate changes in blood pressure, tissues architecture, muscles, bones. So there are some reductions of tissues and different developments. We have also some changes in perception of stimuli, like disorders of vestibular system, feeling up and down directions. We have problems with vision and taste and odor. For psychological changes, we have isolation, confined spaces, homesickness, apathy, fatigue, and mood swings. Much more, I would say, bad for our health are long-term changes. Why? Because short-term changes, they are getting back to normal after coming back to the Earth. So all these changes simply reduce. They regress. For long-term changes, again, we have physical and psychological. We have very serious diseases that can develop in long-term process. And here we can distinguish cancer, cataract, and myopia, or short seeing. For psychological changes, long-term changes, we have stress and human factors. Here we see how space station environment is different comparing to our planet. Here we see 4 astronauts that are showing that there is no really up and down direction on ISS. Even we can see that lamps are located only in one side, and this is like up. Of where we have no lamps, it is like down. But of course, astronaut brain do not feel this. This is just a procedure. Here we see Alexander Gerst, astronaut, testing gripping force of his hand muscles. And this is much harder to do in microgravity environment comparing to how you would do this on Earth. As well, very interesting thing is to weight body mass in space, in microgravity, in weightlessness. So there are several tools, devices developed, and here you see American Space Linear Acceleration Mass Measurement Device called SLAM-D. And how it works. Here you see astronaut Karin Nyberg that sits tightly on some arm, and the arm is generating acceleration, and it is measuring the force. So acceleration is that Karen will be like pushed to the left side of this photo with a known acceleration, and then known force will be analyzed by the device, and based on this, from the first Newton law, we will have the body mass. Quite smart. Another device that exists on International Space Station is Russian Body Mass Measurement device BMMD, which is here used by Dutch astronaut André Kuipers, and this method is based on oscillations of the device. So knowing the acceleration and force, we have a body weight. Here we see again Karin Nyberg, who is using ophthalmoscopy to check her eyes, the pressure in the eye and putative changes in retina. Well, beside microgravity environment, we have also problems with G-forces. During the launch, astronauts are exposed to 4.5 G-force, and when they land, it is again usually 4.5 G in ballistic flight, but sometimes in case of some different cases, there may be 9G or even 11G, which was for Peggy Whitson. Here we see the slide made by NASA, revealing several changes which are familiar for females and males. There are many questions, about who is better to perform in space, women or men? And the answer is not very easy, because there are some problems for men. For example, men suffer more from hearing loss with advancing age, and they display a bias towards loss of hearing in the left ear. And women suffer less. But, for example, women, they have much or more often urinary tract infections. So, it's like not very obvious. And for sure, for biodiversity, for good atmosphere, it is always good to have both males and females in space. Well, there were many studies based on actual astronauts that came back from International Space Station, and based on their monitoring of health, that astronauts are losing bone tissue, not only bone tissue, all kinds of tissues in microgravity, and it is about 1 to 2% per month during the space mission. Here is a comparison to old people, which lose about 1 to 1.5% of bone tissue per year. So you see that this is quite similar, comparable. And astronauts in space and helping them to keep healthy may help also old people with osteoporosis on the Earth. This is very important, especially now in era of Space 4.0. Also, we can see that there is a bone elongation about 5 centimeters, what causes a backbone pain in astronauts. Muscles in microgravity do not keep the standard posture tension, so they do not work properly, and they are similarly to bones not used, what means that they are not needed. For nature, everything is easy. If something is not used, it is not necessary. So please use your brain because our gray cells may be lost. Well, it's not also bone tissue, muscle tissue lost in space. There are also different systems that suffer, for example, circulatory system. And again, this is very important because knowledge and research about circulatory system problems in space and solutions to these problems may bring solutions to circulatory problems on Earth. And this is also very important because on Earth, many people suffer from circulatory system. So we see that there is a heart muscle volume decrease, there is a slow heart rate in space, decreased volume of blood in lower parts of the body, of course. Usually you have 1G, and in microgravity, all blood, all fluids are going up. And after, coming back to the Earth, this sudden drop of the blood to the lower parts of the body may cause fainting because there is much lower amount of blood in the upper part of the body in our brain. And of course, there is a decreased synthesis of blood cells. And it is not only erythrocyte number of cells, so red blood cells are decreasing, but also white blood cells, which are responsible for inflammatory responses. Here you can see on this slide a crew healthcare system, which I mentioned before, and you can see that in several modules of ISS, there are different activities. And you can read much more about it carefully. There are sources where you can read. What is interesting is that on ISS you can even run marathon. So it is because of hard work of hundreds of biomedical engineers and people who prepare a proper equipment mounted, assembled on International Space Station. Here you see Team Peak running marathon on ISS in 2016. During the mission in space, astronauts are continuously monitored, and how it looks like you can see here, and this is based on European Astronaut Center monitoring system. So you see that there are several types of monitoring. First are private medical conferences, PMCs, private psychological conferences, PPCs, private exercise conferences, PECs, physical performances, vision examinations, hearing tests, noise monitoring, calories, body mass, weight. So all these parameters are collected every day. Then cognitive functions also every day. Selected parameters from urine samples. Everything is related to International Space Station environmental monitoring, and there are special weekly meetings with medical doctors at the end. There are many health challenges, of course, on ISS, and one of them is risk of decompression sickness, then hypoxia, hypercapnia, which is abnormally elevated CO2 levels in the blood, biohazard and toxic substances. Sometimes people are vomiting in space station, and all toxic substances, or rather biohazard one, they are floating and they are very dangerous, especially for spreading infections. I mentioned you that astronauts have much lower levels of immune cells, of lymphocytes, so they are much more susceptible to get infection in space. And the second thing is that bacteria, viruses, they can mutate, and they can be more and more viral species. And then, of course, we have some problems with dusts, and this is a quite big problem if it exists on space station. And the final thing, the challenge, is how to provide the privacy, at least the minimal level of privacy. Here I show you a book which is very, very nicely written. Thank you, Mary Roach, the author of the book. It is not advertisement, but very strong recommendation if you are interested in all nasty things that can happen on International Space Station, on space station, anywhere actually. On ISS, we have a crew healthcare system, and this is not only hardware but software too. And here we can distinguish several modules. You can see how they look like on ISS. Here we have Advanced Life Support Pack, Ambulatory Medical Pack, Crew Contamination Protection Kit, and Basic Trauma Life Support. All these things are located on ISS, and astronauts are very well trained to use them. Let's go to some long-term effects after space missions, particularly after cosmic radiation exposure. And this depends on age, gender, type of tissue, so it is not easy topic, especially to establish a good risk estimation. Again, the problem is with dose, type of radiation, and everything also is related with cancer statistic, epidemiology data. So there are so many random, variables that it is very hard to estimate the risk, the cancer risk in this case. But NASA gives 3% of risk to get a cancer after exposure to cosmic radiation, which is quite low, I must say, surprisingly. But this is not the final, topic about radiation. I will speak more about it in next chapter. One more thing about risk estimation for space mission in general is that, first of all, we need to consider human factors, injuries and diseases requiring immediate intervention, and this is like a 6 to 7% of people per year. Then there are injuries and illnesses requiring intensive care, which is 1 to 2% of people per year, but it never happened until now, happily, on ISS. And then finally, there is a risk of mission abortion for medical reasons. And this is like a 1 mission abortion per 5 years. All this data, all these risks are computed based on data coming from extreme environments and extreme missions. For example, US submarine boats, polar stations, and US Air Force. To minimize these risks that I showed you before, the best strategy is prevention. And first prevention stage is, of course, astronaut selection. So nobody can pass astronaut selection who is not healthy enough. And healthy enough means JAR Class 2 flight medicals, JAR from Joint Aviation Requirements. Every one of you who are interested in being an astronaut is able to simply get this certificate, or at least make these medical examinations. Of course, you need to pay some money, but this is possible and everyone can make this medical checkup. Another preventive activity is actual medical examination for astronauts, which is once per year. Examinations, of course, before the mission, monitoring during the mission, rehabilitation after the mission, and continuous health monitoring for astronauts. I mentioned you about infections. They are especially dangerous on space stations. For example, on board the Mir station, it was 234 various fungi and bacteria species which have been characterized. And for ISS, we don't have actual data, but there is also a problem with this microbial life on space stations. What it can cause, this all biodiversity at this micro level? Well, it causes frequent conjunctivitis, lower efficiency of antibiotics. So astronauts have to increase doses of antibiotics in case of infections. And of course, bacteria are much more virulent in space. Here we see Thomas Pasquer holding an active dosimeter. Now I must tell you that European Space Agency is working on radiation. This is because of future plans to create gateway station around the moon. And then in all types of space missions, human spaceflight missions in deep space environment. Deep space environment means beyond our planet's magnetosphere, which protects us from sources of cosmic radiation. And what are these sources of cosmic radiation? We can distinguish three of them. First, the most hazardous one are solar flares, which are high energy protons. They are intermittent, these solar flares, and they are quite short, 1 to 2 days. But they are very hazardous. Then we have a solar wind full of electrons, protons, alpha gamma particles. Solar wind is continuous and it is quite a low hazard, but for people in EVA suits, they may cause some damage. And finally, we have a galactic cosmic rays, which are composed of 87% of high energy protons, 12% of alpha particles, heavy ions, and this radiation is continuous and hazardous. Ionizing radiation, you can see here, has different ionization ability and penetration. For alpha particles, we have very strong ionization ability, but low penetration. For beta is 50-50, so it can be blocked by aluminum. And of course, the gamma particles, radiation, this penetration is very strong, but ionization ability is relatively low. So, what are doses of ionizing radiation? Well, on Earth we have like 1 millisievert per year. So everyone is exposed to ionizing radiation. We are not fully protected. What is very good, I will tell you in a moment why. On ISS, we have 200 times higher this ionizing radiation, because this is like 200 millisieverts per year. On Mars, sorry that this is not for years, for days, but this is like 300 millisieverts per 1.5 year. So it is not that big amount of radiation, of course, for deep space environment. And our deep space environment is quite high, because this is like 300 millisieverts per one travel to Mars. Of course, here we assume that travel to Mars is 180 days. When we are speaking about ionizing radiation and its effects for for biologic target, which is DNA, we can have direct and indirect effects, and both actions will produce reactive species that will, of course, interact and damage the DNA. So here we see the example of direct and indirect effects that cause damage of DNA. There is no information here about all repairing mechanisms that can repair DNA. And this is the most difficult part now for space biology, that we don't know how to very precisely estimate the risk of radiation damage caused for humans, because for many people this repairing machinery is very good and it can repair DNA very fast in a very proper way, very efficient way. When we speak about dosimetry, we can distinguish several kinds of doses, and there is, absorbed dose by the organ, which is measured in grays. Then we have equivalent dose, which is measured in sieverts, efficient dose to the whole body, also measured in sieverts. And we have several factors. You see, we have radiological weighting factor and tissue weighting factor. So the whole problem of dosimetry is not easy. We know, however, the cosmic radiation effects on human body, and this is cataract, cognitive changes, very important and very hard to analyze and to repair. Then we have behavioral changes, skeleton changes, stem cells damage, germ cells mutations, increased risk of cancer, degeneration of circulatory system, nausea, vomiting, and skin burns. What are solutions to reduce radiation dose during the space missions, especially these deep space missions? Well, there is in European Space Agency a group of people working on hibernation and torpor. You see the logo, and they are thinking about simply injecting special anesthetics and chemicals to brainstem of human body, and to induce artificial torpor or synthetic torpor, as it is named, in humans in order to get lower dose of radiation. Because there is a fact that all hibernating animals, or animals which can enter the torpor state, and torpor state is something milder, more mild than hibernation, because there is like slowing down the metabolism, but not completely switching off the metabolism. And normally animals with torpor and hibernation, we know that they are resistant in this state to ionizing radiation. And there are new research revealing that synthetic torpor is a radio protector in non-hibernators. So this European Space Agency team collected with scientists, they already have proved that we can induce synthetic torpor in non-hibernators. And we see here the graphic abstract of this paper. So we see that, of course, exposure to radiation limits our ability for deep space exploration. This is now the number one problem to be solved before we go to the moon, before we go to Mars. And then we see that in this experiment that was performed on rats, which are non-hibernators, and we see that if they are under a synthetic torpor, that they develop increased radio protection. This is very interesting, and for future technologies and challenges, I will say only this, that there will be many new methods, genetical methods and transformations like epigenetic modifications that can be done on humans and all biological systems that will be sent on space missions. Of course, what will be developed very well will be telemedicine, health monitoring, which will be less time consuming what is now actually performed. There will be several chips, nanochips, nanosons that will measure our health parameters. And when we go to the nano level, there will be nanobots. I mentioned you already about hibernation. We need also to develop smart materials, especially resistant for radiation, cosmic radiation in this case. And we need to think about biomimetic solutions. So why this? Because, many things to be produced in deep space environment on Mars or Moon, they will require onboard production, and it is very difficult to repeat the same production processes as they are on Earth, because they are very complex. So we need to imitate biology which is simple and which gives simple solutions. Here also I want to inspire you. Maybe you already watched these movies. These are one of my favorites, revealing these possible future ways and technologies which will be developed. So Gattaca movie for genetic transformations and Ex Machina for artificial intelligence. Very interesting. Well, when we look to the global exploration roadmap delivered by NASA, we see that we are in a very interesting times considering human spaceflight. We are just before going to the moon, going back to the moon, and then going first time to explore Mars. What it means? Well, it means that we have to prepare. And this is, of course, very important. And how we can prepare? We can prepare by using analog simulations, by training, by testing our body and make it more and more, make it better, make it with full knowledge, with full understanding what is going on and what are the risks and what are all dangerous possibilities. So here on this slide you see one type of simulation of experimental conditions, analog experimental conditions. In this case, these conditions simulate microgravity in zero-G flight. And here My partner Matt on the first plan, the black t-shirt guy, he is experimental rabbit of the team who are testing how vestibular system works in zero-G flight. And this is very important because usually astronauts, they have to take scopolamine, some drug that has many side effects. And of course we need to develop new techniques in order to reduce these vestibular distortions. Another possibility to train and to make our body, to test actually our body, is of course human centrifuge. Here we see again my partner who is testing a Soyuz profile in Poland on the human centrifuge at Military Institute of Aviation Medicine. And this is how centrifuge looks like from outside. And then here this is Matt in the cabin just before the test. And here we see operator of the centrifuge control center. In fact, there were many people operating. Here is a medical doctor. You can see on the screens several physiological parameters and of course centrifuge profiles. At the same place, there is possibility to train hypoxia and how future astronauts or pilots would feel. And here you see people filling cognitive tests and testing their bodies how they can sustain hypoxia state. This is the example of this test. It is not so, difficult. So you simply have some figures and numbers, and you need to fill in properly this test. Of course, the most important thing is to have the right stuff. Again, this is a cadre from the movie, The Right Stuff, but this is very important. In order to be prepared to the mission, you are not only supposed to have a proper knowledge, understanding, training, but you need to have the proper character. And how to get know if you have the right stuff. The best is, again, to test in analog simulations. And here is the slide from our trainings that our Analog Astronaut Training Center is offering to everyone internationally. We are providing air, land and water trainings. So here you can see how your body responds to different extremes. And of course we are running analog simulations. We are running lunar and Martian analog simulations. Here you see the analog astronaut crews on the left side, logos of the mission and mission control center teams, which are now reduced to only 2 people because we wrote a habitat operational system, a special software using artificial intelligence that is helping us to control the mission. Interesting fact. What people, our analog astronauts, are doing during the analog missions, analog simulations. So, of course, we are trying to run several scientific experiments. And in order to get, financing and all kind of exciting scenarios for the mission. Usually these missions are 2 weeks missions, so we need to provide a very tight schedule for each person and for each mission we have from 4 to 6 people. So we need to have several scientific and technological experiments on board. And here you see one of such experiment, which is testing plant growth on different regolith medias. And yeah, it's very interesting work, and our analog astronauts really like it. Another example, what we do during our analog simulations is testing prototypes of various solutions to be sent, of course, to the moon base or Mars base. And here you have a prototype of a greenhouse, a hydroponic system. We see several columns here, and each column is different experiment. So we use different medias again. We try to generate medias from very simple bacterial solutions, which is kombucha, and other type of, organic wastes. So we are, working on optimizing waste management in isolated space. All these experiments and the analog simulations are made in the habitat. We already built 2 analog habitats in Poland. One in Piła, which is Lunares, and then second one is in south of Poland, and this is called Analog Astronaut Training Center. As I told you already, we are working on making everything easier and less time consuming. So we have several type of sensors that are monitoring our habitat during analogs, and we are monitoring all types of parameters like relative humidity, temperature, electricity, all kinds of parameters, including cosmic radiation, of course. And this is the desktop of the Habitat's operational system. Matt was writing it, that is why his face is here. But here you see the dashboard, and we see that there are many functions of this system. So there is, of course, a part for space medicine, for experiments, for communication, for monitoring of the habitat and administration. During our analog simulations, we always try to make something valid and something publishable, or something that can be presented on international space conferences. And here I give you only some examples. For example, we tested a prototype of pneumonitor, which was a device, biomedical device developed by Marcel Młyńczak, a PhD student from Warsaw University of Technology. And we were testing during our analog simulation. Here on the left you see the habitat, how it looks like from outside. We tested on our analog astronauts their performance during EVA, and this was a cardiorespiratory profile that we got after squats or during the stable state or during EVA, and we are comparing the heart rates, breathing regularity, and of course electrocardiograms. My particular interest in analog missions are time illusions. Why? Because I think, as a biologist, as a chronobiologist, that astronauts may have problems with time perception, in particular during deep space missions on the Moon and on Mars. And in order to find out how it will look like, we are developing several experiments with time illusions. So here you see our analog astronaut with some special sensors here on the chest, and these sensors are measuring several physiological parameters remotely. So analog astronauts doesn't have to do anything basically, and just hold it on the chest. And these all analog astronauts are exposed to different time. So our habitat operational system can simulate different times. So the second is no longer a second. For people, specialists of hardware, people might know that this is not easy thing to do, but we can shorten the second and make it longer. And using this function, we are making time illusions on our astronauts, and we are making time shifts to simulate jet lags and to analyze their behavior and all types of performances. Here you see this sensor that was on the chest of our analog astronaut on the previous slide, and this was developed by students from University of Warsaw. And among many sensors that are mounted on this plate, we have a voice sensor which records voice frequency and amplitude, and based on these two parameters we can see group dynamics in the crew, and we can see all communication patterns and stress reaction. So basically, when amplitude is higher, we observe if this is not related with stress. Of course, we analyze other physiological parameters to get a proper result. Here you see the example of voice frequency on our astronauts. We have here 6 astronauts, and we see that girls, they have higher frequency of their voices, and men had lower frequency. And here we see an example of detected meetings. We have a diagram of all 6 people here, analog astronauts, and voice frequency. Basically, black, dark color means that frequency is high. White color is that frequency is low. And you see here that there is some conjunction where all people are speaking, and this means that there is a meeting there. Another experiment that we were doing, and we are still continuing during our analog astronaut missions simulations, we are trying to analyze circadian clock and subjective time perception. And we ask our analog astronauts to perform many physical trainings, similar like on ISS, and also some cognitive tests like Sudoku. These are called combined experiments. We are also writing applications to write subjective time perception. And as you see here, in 2 week, 12 days mission, first 3 days are normal as on Earth, 24 hours. Then we have 4 days of 26-hour day. So day is longer. Then 4 hours, the day is shorter, 22 hours. Of course, astronauts, they do not know about it. And then we are coming them back to normal 24-hour cycle. And you see that there are like 4 phases, yes? So here we see results that, for example, there are some changes in drinking water and in urine release. So basically we can see some metabolic changes related with water metabolism, and we see that astronauts, analog astronauts of course in this case, seem to release less water during jet lag phases, so phase 2 and phase 3. This is very interesting study, and we are continuing this for many years now on several groups of people, just to raise statistics. When we are speaking about subjective time perception, we see that we can train subjective time perception, what is very good for us because we want to train people to make open access application to train subjective time perception. And this is, I think, important also for people working on Earth, just to keep going. And I think that I already made my hour lecture coming back to time perception, so I will be brief now. That we are also working during simulations on various types of artificial light in order to optimize health in isolated spaces, and we are also developing several biomaterials. For example, here you see a paper that we presented on International Astronautical Congress, where we used kombucha, which is a microbial consortium of yeasts and bacteria, and especially acidic bacteria in this consortium, they produce a polymer, which is a bacterial cellulose, and we are now trying to optimize process and to simplify it to be ready to launch on the International Space Station and to produce the first space gloves, space textiles on space station. And with this, I would like to thank you very much for attention and welcome to collaborate. I'm very open for all questions. I will try to answer. Just please write me and I will do this with great pleasure. Thank you very much.
The first question is, what are the advantages of manufacturing of pharmaceuticals? Are there plans to grow organs in space labs?
Well, this is, of course, very interesting topic. And good thing is that it is possible, but there are still many problems because cells growing in space, they grow much smaller, and it is not yet optimized. What is much better is to produce drugs. For example, insulin crystals are much better in microgravity. It's because simply there are no disturbing forces for these crystals to grow. So the insulin produced in space is much more functional and better. So I would say that inorganic, or rather organic chemistry, simple chemistry, this can be done in space. Of course, it needs much more studies to do. But when it comes to organs, to biological sort of systems, this may be a problem because cells grow differently in microgravity.
Thank you, ma'am, for answering. The second question is, do we have any special branch in medical science to have treated the disease originated in space?
Could you please repeat one more time?
Yeah. Do we have any special branch in medical science to treat the diseases originated in space?
Well, I have no idea about such divisions of medicine yet, but probably, you know, everything starts to develop now. Now is the time where space medicine, space biology needs to be developed.
I think, can I have this Jaykumar here? I think, this Scott Skelly, about some bone engineering, something like how the bone will behave. Some kind of the studies are happening around. But we cannot say like this is like a disease, but it might be some deficiency and you can human engineering factors. I mean, you can say like.
And what is the question?
Agata, this is not for you.
Okay.
There's one more question from the attendees. Do astronauts consume algae as their food?
Well, I think that astronauts, they have some food that contains algae like chlorella or spirulina, but these algae are added so they do not really feel this algae taste, yes, because it is kind of neutral. So yes, they do, but until now, as far as I know, they do not grow on board of space station algae, and they do not prepare algae from the live cultures. So this is not yet done.
Thank you for answering the question. The next question is, what do we have to consider in health when living on Mars?
Of course, what I said during the lecture, the first concern is cosmic radiation. So definitely we should create the proper shelter, preferably underground, to be able to live normally, so to say, considering cosmic radiation. Other thing is homesickness and the long distance from Earth, what means that these people should have first of all, a special character, so they like to live isolated. They know how to do this, how to cope with many problems staying alone. And of course, another thing is a good communication with Earth. Even there will be a time delay, like 40 hours, 20 minutes one side, 20 minutes back to Earth in the communication line. But despite this communication delay, there should be developed tools to really keep this contact with Earth very tight and very nice, so people will not suffer from homesickness. So this is second thing. And then of course, developing all biodiversity on Mars, because you know we are not alone. We are connected bodies with all other organisms, and this means that, for example, we have more bacteria cells in our organism than our body cells. So this means that we are not going alone to Mars, but we are carrying microbiomes, our friends. And in order to keep all these biosystem healthy, we need to bring all biodiversity together with us. And this is very difficult because now we know roughly 1% about microbiomes. So this is a completely terra incognita, unknown, space for scientists that we have to develop. We have to make research, and we have to identify what is completely crucial to keep us and to keep life healthy on Mars. This we don't know how much to develop the proper life support systems, not only, you know, air, water, food, but we need to carry with us some biodiversity.
Thank you. The next question is, what are the books and courses would you like to recommend to clear the first stage of astronaut exams in math, science, and other subjects?
You want me to tell about books or
Yeah,
online courses?
both books and courses which they can help them to clear the exam.
Ooh, I can write it down later on, either in the chat. I don't know how you want this form because there are many. Of course, it should be like a basic high school, minimum high school level of maths, physics, computer science a bit, yes, too. Languages are very important in space. So more languages you know, it's better. So Italian, Dutch, of course, English, Russian, then German, many languages, and now more because, of course, China is flying to space. India wants to fly to space very soon. So more languages, you know, it is the better, and it's better to start earlier than later with languages because of our learning skills. So this, I also recommend participating in several practical courses from rocket science, material science, biology, chemistry, medicine. So even if you are not a medical doctor, you still can participate in some medical courses. And for example, EDX, there is a international platform that you can select for free some courses, EDX. Very nice platform. Even astronauts, they give lectures there. So it's very nice form to study, to learn, and to prepare.
There's an interesting question. So they wanted to know, how are the 3D printed pizzas given to astronauts?
This I don't know. This is like more technology than medicine. So I have no idea about this, but of course, 3D printing is a very, how to say, hot topic in space because everything can be 3D printed, more and more things actually. And it's very easy. You simply need to carry some, you know, like glue, and everything you can find in situ, for example, on the moon or on Mars. So that is the idea, to bring 3D printers there. And considering food, of course, there are already 3D printers printing food from powders and some water. And it's kind of now a nice technique. What we are doing as Analog Astronaut Training Center, we are trying to develop 3D printing technique to produce textiles in space, so that it will be, you can program what kind of clothes you need, t-shirt or trousers, and 3D printer will print it. So this I know because it's my project. I don't know anything about food projects, but I know that they exist.
Mhm. Yeah. The next question is there any way to prevent damage to the optic nerve of astronauts or any rehabilitation?
I mean, it's very easy way to place lens from the eye when you have a cataract because of radiation or other damage. I think it's very simple now to get a surgery and to replace lenses for artificial ones, and many people are doing this here on the world as well, astronauts. So I think now this is not a really problem. The largest problem is pain because of intercranial pressure. in microgravity, all your fluids go up and they push your eyeballs to go out. And this is really painful. So this you cannot really prevent. You need to adjust, and your body needs to adjust. It's like three days approximately that you should already start to adjust to this.
Thank you. The next question is can there be a surgery done in space for any major injury which takes place in space?
Could you please?
Yeah. Can surgery be done in space for any major accident to the human body?
Until now, there was no surgery made in space because there was no need, fortunately. But there was one astronaut that had a tooth pain, and he wanted to extrude it from the jaw. Fortunately, he didn't have to do this. But yes, there is possibility to make some simple surgeries now in space. Exactly, like a tooth extraction or some simple, sewing wounds. So this is possible to make. For more complex surgeries, it's better to come back, because from International Space Station, it takes 90 minutes to go back to Earth. So it's not so long, 1.5 hours, but for some diseases, of course, it is quite a long time.
Yeah, that answers the question. The next question is, what is the role of the environmental engineer in space?
Big topic, and the role is very important, because again, I'm coming back to these microbiomes, that we are not alone in space. We are a jungle of organisms, not only humans there. And in order to keep everything in balance, in biological balance, we need to really get into these environmental problems, such as waste management. This is, maybe not really a big topic externally shown for public, but this is one of the major problem in space: waste management. So absolutely, this is crucial thing. Another crucial thing is how to manage and recycle water in space, how to produce some biomass, some food in space, and of course, how to keep healthy atmosphere and good environmental parameters. How to keep everything clean from viruses, how to prevent mutations, wrong mutations. These all questions are very important, and all people from environmental sciences, they have a lot of work to do.
So we'll move on to the last three questions for the session. So the last question, the next question is there any possibility of space tourism for the common people? If yes, what are the rules and restrictions for that, for a normal person to go to space?
Well, space tourism is very exclusive because it is very expensive. For example, one day on International Space costs $36,000. Yes, $36,000 per day on ISS. Of course, not saying about flying there. So this is one thing. Another thing is that, fortunately, there are many private companies who are developing space tourism, like Blue Origin, for example. Of course, Elon Musk is planning to do this. And I'm a big fan of space tourism, because I believe that this will be one of the most powerful branch of space business in the future. Our brain is very exploratory brain, and we here on Earth want to discover want to learn new things. And if we will not do this, if our brains will be, bored, we start to have several diseases. So this brain starts to build sick things. So we need to explore. There are many people going to Mount Everest. Every time there is a long queue. Why people do this? Yes. Why people, they want to go to the highest mountain on this planet? Is this exploration power of our brain? They need to have new experiences, and this is really good for us, especially for humanity. I believe that if more and more people will see our planet, how fragile it is, how we are unique, how life is beautiful and unique on this planet, we will completely change treating our planet to be much better for our planet. So I believe that in 5-10 years, space tourism will be affordable for people. Elon Musk says that he wants to create possibility that a person can sell a house here on Earth, and for this money, this person can go to Mars and live there. So the price of house is not so much to go to Mars, yes? And I believe that orbital travels will be really affordable for all of us. Of course, we will need to make some pre-training because of G-forces, because of all procedures that, of course, they are in space, they will be in space. And so I believe that this pre-training can be shortened. Now, if you want to be a space tourist, you need to perform the full training, 2 years of training as a normal astronaut, which is very time consuming, and you need to have a lot of money to afford to this. So I believe that in 10 years, we will have only like 3 days of pre-training and we can be a space tourists. I really keep fingers crossed to do this, and of course I want to be one of space tourists in space. That's the
How do you imagine the life on Mars?
Well, life on Mars, you mean that we will bring this life to Mars and then we will live, or that there is some other life?
We going to Mars at that point of time, our life in Mars.
I believe that this will be in about 2040. So in 20 years from now, I believe that we will be already on Mars. Maybe earlier if Elon Musk will go sooner, but space agencies, they say that the most rational time is 20 years from now. Then we will have ready technologies to build a proper habitat on Mars and to start explore it. So there will be no stable colony on Mars. The life will be not like constant there, but there will be astronauts coming to Mars and back to Earth just to make exploration studies first. And then after years, probably we will start to colonize Mars. What will happen, with colonization, I believe that very soon we will start to colonize Moon. Because it's very close to our planet. It's only 3 days of journey. And I believe that this is very nice testing platform to create the proper habitats, the proper, buildings, safe buildings, and then to move this technology from the Moon to Mars, and then we will be ready. So considering this, that first we need to test everything on the Moon and then move these old technologies to Mars, I think that 20 years will be enough.
The last question for the session by Sumit. How do we control the circulatory system of the astronaut?
Circadian system, yes?
The
You
circulatory
mean
system.
biological clock?
Yes, yeah.
What? A
The
circulatory?
Yeah.
Circulatory system. Well, of course, there is a blood pressure measured every day, heartbeat, pulse oximetry, so the levels of oxygen in the blood. These all parameters are monitored, and usually circulatory system slows down in space, in microgravity. After 3 days approximately, again it depends from person to person, your circulatory system should be more or less stable at the new environment in microgravity. And I think, yeah, this moon phase, the first hours, days, that you have all these fluids going up, again, this is corrected by your receptors in blood vessels after a few days when they adjust. So fortunately, we are adjustable creatures, and our body is amazing. It can change its self parameters. But of course, there are some drugs that you can induce changes in circulatory system. There are these drugs on board. And of course, physical activity, that you can work on your circulatory system just using physical exercises.